John Bennett was just an ordinary man. He wasn't famous, he wasn't rich, and he didn't have any special skills, except one. He was an explorer. His curiosity for the unknown had driven him to the stars, traveling to distant galaxies with a small, unremarkable spacecraft. But today, that curiosity had led him into the biggest mistake of his life. It all began when John decided to check out a new, uncharted planet. His ship, the Wanderer, was small, old, and a little beat up, but it had been his trusty companion on many adventures. He didn't expect much when he set the ship on course for a planet on the far edge of the galaxy. He thought it would be like the other ones, empty, untouched, and quiet. He never imagined crashing into a royal wedding. As he approached the planet's atmosphere, something went wrong. The ship's instruments started flashing red, and a loud alarm blared in his ears. The controls became unresponsive, and John's heart raced. He slammed his hands on the console, trying to regain control, but it was no use. The ship was out of control, and there was nothing he could do but brace for impact. The Wanderer plummeted. Through the sky, hurtling towards the ground like a falling star, trees, rocks, and strange alien structures passed by in a blur as he screamed in panic. Then, with a loud crash, the ship hit the ground, sending a cloud of dirt and dust into the air. The ship came to a sudden stop, and John was thrown forward, his head slamming into the controls. For a few moments everything was silent. The dust settled, and John groaned, slowly pulling himself out of the wreckage. His head throbbed, and his body ached, but he was alive. He looked around, blinking. As his vision cleared, he had landed in the middle of a vast open area, surrounded by alien buildings that looked nothing like anything he had ever seen before. The architecture was grand and strange, like something out of a dream. Before he could fully comprehend where he was, a strange sound reached his ears. It was a melody, soft and beautiful, echoing from somewhere nearby. John's curiosity got the best of him, and he stood up, wiping the dirt from his clothes. His heart was still racing from the crash, but his curiosity had always been stronger than his fear. He stumbled toward the source of the music, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. As he walked, he began to notice something strange. The ground was not made of dirt, but some kind of soft, metallic surface that seemed to shimmer in the light. The air smelled fresh, filled with a sweet, floral scent that reminded him of spring back on Earth. When he turned a corner, he froze. He had found the source of the music and more. There, in the middle of a grand courtyard, stood a group of alien beings. They were tall and elegant, dressed in shimmering robes. Their features were sharp, their skin a pale, otherworldly color, and their eyes glowed with an unnatural light. They seemed to be in the middle of a ceremony, and as John looked closer, he realized something even more surprising. It was a wedding. At the center of the ceremony stood a woman, or at least she appeared to be one. She was beautiful beyond words, with long flowing hair that sparkled like silver in the light. Her eyes were deep and intense, and she stood with an air of grace and authority. She was dressed in a gown made of iridescent fabric, and the crowd around her was silent, watching her every move. John's heart skipped a beat. The woman was breathtaking. He had never seen anything like her, and for a moment, he forgot all about his crash. His mind was consumed with awe. Who was she? What was this place? And why was he here? Without thinking, he took a step forward. But as soon as his foot hit the ground, the sound of the wedding was interrupted. The ground trembled beneath him, and the crowd of aliens turned to look in his direction. John froze, realizing too late that he had made a mistake. The alien princess's eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Her face showed no sign of anger, but there was an expression of surprise and something else. Something John couldn't quite place. Who dares to interrupt the royal wedding? A voice boomed from the crowd. It was deep and commanding, coming from an older alien male who stepped forward. He was dressed in robes that marked him as someone important, perhaps the princess's father, or another royal figure. The crowd behind him began murmuring, and John could feel their eyes on him, judging. Waiting for an explanation, John gulped, unsure of what to say. He looked down at his hands, still holding his head from the crash. I didn't mean to. Interrupt, he stammered. I crashed. My ship crashed. I'm sorry. I didn't know this was a wedding. The crowd continued to stare at him in stunned silence. The princess, however, said nothing. She simply stood there, her gaze never leaving him. John's heart raced. The princess looked as if she had seen something in him, something that made her hesitate. The tension in the air grew thick. And for a long moment, John thought he might be thrown into prison or worse for his accidental intrusion. But then, to his surprise, the princess spoke. Perhaps this is fate, she said, her voice soft but firm. Maybe this human is meant to be here. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. John's mind raced. What was happening? How could she think this was fate? He had just crashed his ship into their wedding. The royal figure who had spoken before turned to the princess, eyes narrowing. What do you mean, Your Highness? This is no time for games? But the princess held up her hand, silencing him. She stepped forward, walking toward John with an air of confidence. Her eyes softened, and when she reached him, she smiled. I will marry him, she declared. John's eyes widened in shock. Wait, what? He stammered. What are you talking about? But the princess simply looked at him, her gaze filled with a strange determination. It is decided. You're my husband now. The crowd fell silent, and John's heart sank. He had no idea what was happening, but somehow in the chaos of his accidental crash, he had just become the husband of an alien princess. John stood there, frozen, as the alien princess declared that he was now her husband. The crowd of aliens around them murmured in disbelief, their eyes flicking between him and the princess. His mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. Wait, John stammered, raising his hands. I think there's been a mistake. I'm just a Pilotan explorer. Didn't mean to crash into your ceremony. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. But the princess remained calm, her expression thoughtful. As she gazed at him, she took a step closer, the soft fabric of her gown trailing behind her like a shimmering cloud. The crowd continued to watch in stunned silence. The princess's eyes were a deep, glowing shade of violet, and they seemed to look right through John, as if she could see into his very soul. She didn't appear angry or confused, only ... interested. It was as though, in some strange way, she had been waiting for this moment. You are my husband now, she said again, her voice soft but firm. The ceremony has been disrupted. But maybe that is fate's way of telling us that you belong here with me. John opened his mouth to protest again, but the words stuck in his throat. His brain couldn't keep up with the situation. He was stuck on an alien planet, surrounded by beings who clearly didn't see him as just an outsider. He had crashed into their royal wedding, and now they were treating him like a husband. He glanced nervously at the crowd of onlookers, who were still silent, waiting for something to happen. The air around him felt heavy, and he could feel the weight of their gazes pressing down on him. The princess's declaration had left everyone in a state of stunned shock, and John didn't know what to do next. The older alien who had spoken earlier, the one who had demanded to know who dared to interrupt the ceremony, stepped forward. His face was full of confusion and disbelief, but there was a hint of something else, something that might have been fear. Your Highness, he began, his voice low and hesitant. This human? He is no royal. He cannot marry you. There are laws or all's that cannot be ignored. He is an outsider, an unknown being from another world. John opened his mouth, about to agree with the alien, but the princess raised her hand, silencing him with a single gesture. She was not angry, but there was a clear command in her movement. I do not need the laws, the princess said, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had always been in control. I need someone who will be by my side, someone who understands what it means to fight for freedom. The older alien took a step back, clearly taken aback by her words. He glanced at the other royals, who were now whispering among themselves. The princess was not like any ruler they had ever known. She was different, and the moment she had spoken, it had become clear that she was not going to be easily swayed. John stood still, trying to absorb everything that was happening. He had no idea what was going on, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to escape this easily. The princess had made her decision, and there was nothing he could do to change it. But why me? John asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Why would you choose me? I'm just a man, not part of your world. I don't know anything about your customs, your rules, your ... anything. The princess smiled, a soft, knowing smile that made John's heart skip a beat. It was as though she understood everything, even the confusion he was feeling. I see something in you, she said quietly. Something that has been missing in my life. I have been forced into this marriage with a prince who I do not love. I have been trapped in a world of expectations, where my every move is controlled. By others. But you. She paused, looking at him with a new intensity. You are free. You are not bound by my people's rules. You can see the world as it is, not as others want you to see it. I want that freedom, John, and I think you do, too. John felt his breath catch in his throat. He'd never expected anything like this. His princess, this beautiful, powerful woman, was talking to him as if he was the answer to all her problems. As if he could help her escape the life she had been forced into. But John didn't know what to say. He was just a man who had crashed into her wedding. How could he possibly help her? How could he possibly become her husband in this strange alien world? I don't understand, he muttered, shaking his head. You need someone who understands your world, your people, your ways. I don't even know where I am. I don't even know what's happening half the time. The princess stepped closer, her eyes softening. And that's exactly why you're the one I need, she said. You don't belong here, and that's why you can help me. You see things differently. You can help me break free from the chains that have held me for so long. John wanted to argue. What? He wanted to tell her that he wasn't the right choice. He wasn't even sure he could survive in this alien world, let alone help her change anything. But when he looked into her eyes, something inside him shifted. He could see the desperation in her gaze, the longing for freedom, the way she was trying so hard to make it all work. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his hand outstretched. The princess looked at him, her eyes wide as if she hadn't expected this move. Slowly, she took his hand in hers, her touch cool but soft. For a moment they stood there, locked in an understanding that neither of them had expected. I don't know what I'm doing, John said, his voice low, but I'll try. I'll try to help you. I don't want to see you trapped here. Small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of the princess's lips. Thank you, she whispered. That's all I need right now. Someone who will try. As they stood there, the murmurs of the crowd faded into the background. John had no idea what the future would bring, but for the first time since he had crashed into this alien world, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The princess, whose name John had only just learned was Leora, walked beside him through the grand palace halls, her presence commanding the respect of everyone they passed. John, still in shock over what had just happened, struggled to keep up with her long strides. He had no idea what to do or where to go, but somehow Leora made him feel like he was part of something important as they walked. The tension in the air seemed to thicken with every step. John couldn't help but notice how different this world was from his own. The walls of the palace were made of smooth, glowing stone, with intricate patterns etched into every surface. The light here was soft and almost dreamlike, casting long shadows that danced as they passed. John's thoughts were still racing. He had no idea how he'd gotten into this situation. Just hours ago, he had been flying through space, mapping out unknown planets, and now he was married to an alien princess, the most powerful woman on this strange planet. He glanced at Leora, who was walking ahead, her expression serious, her eyes focused. She didn't look like someone who had just been forced into an arranged marriage, someone who had accidentally been paired with a stranger. She looked determined, powerful, almost like she knew exactly what she was doing. Finally, he reached a large chamber at the heart of the palace. It was decorated with banners and tapestries that shimmered in the light, each one depicting ancient legends of the alien royal family. At the center of the room, a group of alien nobles were gathered, all eyes turning to the princess as she entered. Your Highness, a voice called out, and John looked to see an older alien, his face sharp and his robe rich with gold embroidery. He bowed deeply, but his eyes held a hint of suspicion. What is this? What is the meaning of this? Human Leora didn't flinch at the question. She stood tall, her chin lifted as she addressed the assembly. John could feel the weight of everyone's gaze upon him, but he tried to stand as tall as he could, though he felt like a small fish in a big, dangerous pond. This is my husband, Leora announced clearly, her voice steady. His name is John Bennett. I have chosen him. The room fell silent, the shock apparent on every face. The nobles exchanged glances, some whispering, others staring at John like he was a puzzle they couldn't solve. John stood still, unsure of what to do next. He had no idea how to behave in this royal setting, felt awkward and out of place, but Leora's steady gaze kept him rooted to the spot. I don't understand, one of the nobles finally said. His voice was deep with an edge of disbelief. The royal line has never accepted outsiders. The princess was promised to Prince Zalek, and now you bring a human into our court? This is an insult. Leora turned to the noble, her expression unyielding. Prince Zilak has no place in my life. I have been forced into a marriage that I do not want. John will be my partner, not him. The nobles stared at her, shocked by her words. There were mutters of disapproval, but Leora held her ground, her eyes fierce. John, still unsure of what to do, found his voice. I'm sorry about all this, he said awkwardly. I didn't mean to crash into your ceremony. I didn't mean to cause trouble. But, well, I'm not from here. I'm not even supposed to be here. I just want to help if I can. Leora turned her gaze to him, and for a brief moment, John thought he saw a flicker of amusement in her eyes. Then she addressed the nobles again, her voice commanding the room. Enough, she said. This is not a time for arguments. I have made my decision, and I will not be swayed. John is my husband, and he will take his place here. There was a moment of silence as the nobles took in her words. Finally, the older noble who had spoken earlier stepped forward. His face was still stern, but there was a hint of concern in his voice. Your Highness, he began slowly, the kingdom cannot accept this. The laws of our people do not allow a human to marry into the royal family. There must be consequences for breaking the law. Leora's eyes narrowed, and she took a step forward, her voice growing stronger. Then it is time for those laws to change. We have been trapped in old traditions for far too long. It's time for a new way forward. The nobles murmured among themselves, clearly unsettled. Some were still in shock, while others appeared to be considering Leora's words. John could see the tension in the room. Leora's boldness had thrown everything into chaos. One of the younger nobles, a woman with bright silver skin and sharp eyes, stepped forward. But what of our people's trust in you, Your Highness? What will they say when they learn that you have chosen a human over a prince of your own kind? Leora glanced at her, her expression softening slightly. What will they say when they learn I have chosen freedom, and they see that I am no longer bound by the chains of tradition? There was a long silence, and then, to John's surprise, the older noble spoke again, his voice calm but heavy with resignation. The law is clear, Your Highness, but so is the power of the crown. If you are truly committed to this, then we must follow your lead. The kingdom will accept the decision. For now. Leora nodded, her eyes never leaving the noble. Thank you, she said simply. But there will be no turning back. The royal family must change, or we will fall. John, still overwhelmed by the weight of the situation, looked between Leora and the nobles. He didn't know what was happening, but it was clear that Leora wasn't just trying to change her own life. She was trying to change everything. The entire kingdom's way of life was shifting before his eyes. With a deep breath, Leora turned to John. Come with me, she said. Softly, there is much more to do. We have much work ahead of us. John nodded, though he still had no idea what that work would involve. But for the first time since crashing on this alien world, he felt something he hadn't expected. A sense of purpose. This was a mess, yes, but it was also a chance for him to do something he never thought he could, something that mattered. As they walked out of the grand chamber, John realized that this was just the beginning. Whatever happened next, his life would never be the same. The palace had never felt so alive. The air was thick with excitement, tension, and uncertainty. John still couldn't believe what had happened. A few days ago, he had been exploring the stars, minding his own business. Now he was the husband of an alien princess. And everything about his life had changed in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. Today was important. It was the day of the bonding ceremony where John and Princess Leora would be officially recognized as a married couple by her people. Leora had insisted on it, despite the protests from the royal council. The nobles were still unsettled by her decision, but they had no choice but to go along with it. The power of the crown, combined with Leora's stubborn determination, had forced everyone to accept the new reality. John had no idea what to expect from this ceremony. He had never been part of anything like this before. As a human, he was an outsider in every sense of the word, and the idea of participating in an alien ritual filled him with a sense of unease. The gravity of what he had agreed to weighed heavily on his shoulders. Leora had tried to reassure him. "It's just a formality," she had said, "a ceremony to make it official. You don't have to worry, just be yourself." But that didn't help much. How could he not worry? He was about to stand before the most powerful beings on the planet, and they were going to make him part of their royal family. He had no idea what he was doing, and the whole thing felt like a dream, a strange, unreal dream. As John walked through the palace halls toward the grand chamber where the ceremony would take place, he couldn't help but feel nervous. He had already seen how serious the nobles were, how they looked at him with a mixture of confusion and judgment. Now, he was about to become an official member of their world. How could he possibly fit in? The room where the ceremony was being held was massive. The walls were lined with beautiful tapestries depicting the history of the royal family, scenes of battles, celebrations, and victories. There were candles floating in midair, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. The air smelled faintly of incense, and the soft hum of the palace's ancient machinery filled the background. Leora was already standing at the center of the room, surrounded by her closest advisors and the royal council. She was dressed in the same shimmering gown she had worn on the day they first met, the light from the candles reflecting off the delicate fabric. Her eyes were calm, but John could see the determination behind them. This was her decision, and she was not going to back down. John took a deep breath as he walked toward her. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the vast room. He was nervous, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The ceremony wasn't just for show. It was a deep, meaningful tradition for the aliens. He didn't understand it fully, but he could feel the weight of its significance. When he reached Leora, she looked at him, her eyes softening. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes said everything. She was standing beside him, ready to face whatever came next. A regal figure approached them, an older alien who wore the most elaborate robes John had seen yet. His skin was a deep, rich blue, and his eyes were sharp, his expression stern.
Nice.
Was the one who had argued the most against John's presence. But now he was the one who would lead the ceremony, Prince John. "Princess Leora," the alien said, his voice deep and commanding. "We gather here today to witness the bonding of two souls. The laws of our people dictate that this union is sacred, a symbol of trust, honor, and the future of our kingdom." John felt a shiver run down his spine. He had been through a lot in the last few days, but nothing compared to the gravity of this moment. He wasn't just marrying a princess. He was becoming part of her world, part of her legacy. The elder alien continued. "Do you, Leora, accept this human as your husband, your partner, and your equal in all things?" Leora's gaze never left. "John, I do," she said, her voice steady and filled with purpose. The elder turned to John. "And do you, John Bennett, accept this princess, this ruler of our people, as your wife, your partner, and your equal in all things?" John hesitated. For a moment, he thought about everything that had let him hear the crash. The confusion, the uncertainty, and then he looked at Leora. Despite the confusion, despite everything that was strange and unfamiliar, he knew one thing for certain. She had chosen him. She had stood up for him when no one else would, and now it was his turn to stand by her. "I do," John said, his voice firm. though it felt like his heart was racing in his chest. The elder nodded, his expression softening for the first time. He gestured for the attendants to approach. Two alien servants stepped forward, holding a beautiful, intricately carved stone. It was glowing softly, and John could feel a strange energy radiating from it. The elder raised it above their heads, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "This bond is sealed," the elder said. "By this ceremony, you are bound together, not just as husband and wife, but as leaders of our people. May your union bring strength to our kingdom and hope to all those who follow us." As he spoke, the stone pulsed with light, and John felt a wave of energy wash over him. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, like something deep within him had shifted. The room seemed to hum with the power of the ceremony, and for a brief moment, John felt as if he was part of something much bigger than himself. Something ancient. When the ceremony was over, the elder stepped back, and the attendants bowed, their faces respectful. John and Leora stood together, hands clasped, as the room erupted in applause. When once looked at him with disdain, were now clapping and nodding in approval. Some still looked uncertain, but others seemed to accept the new reality. John looked at Leora, his heart swelling with something he couldn't name. She smiled at him. A real smile, one that showed the warmth and strength behind her eyes. For the first time since he had crashed into her world, he felt like he might actually belong here. The elder spoke once more. "Let this union be the beginning of a new era. You are no longer strangers to our world. You are one of us." John couldn't help but smile. He still didn't fully understand this strange new world. But one thing was clear. He had a place here, by Leora's side, as the ceremony came to an end and the guests began to leave. John and Leora stood together, ready to face whatever came. Next, the future was uncertain, but for the first time, John felt ready to embrace it. The days following the bonding ceremony were unlike anything John had ever experienced. The royal palace was a whirlwind of activity, with diplomats, nobles, and advisors constantly surrounding him. Everyone seemed to have an opinion on the newly formed union between him and Princess Leora, and they weren't afraid to voice it. Some treated him like a curiosity, others with suspicion, and a few even with open hostility. But through it all, Leora remained by his side, her quiet support. The only thing that kept him grounded? She never seemed worried about the tensions around them, and that gave John the courage to face each new challenge. But things were about to get much more complicated. It all started with a message delivered in the dead of night. John had just finished his training session in the palace's training room when an attendant arrived. Breathless and wide-eyed, "Prince John," the attendant said nervously, "you are summoned to the royal courtyard. Prince Zalok requests a duel." John frowned. The name Zalok sounded familiar. He had heard it mentioned during his first days in the palace, mostly by the nobles, who seemed to resent his presence. They had called him the former fiancé of Princess Leora. It's the one she was supposed to marry before everything changed. "What does he want?" John asked, his voice still heavy with the exhaustion of his training. "The duel is a challenge to your right to marry the princess," the attendant explained. "Prince Zelot claims that you are not fit to be her husband. He insists that the marriage cannot stand unless you prove your worth." John blinked in surprise. A duel? He didn't even know how to hold a weapon properly, let alone fight someone like Zulok, who was clearly a skilled warrior. But the look on the attendant's face told him there was no choice. He had to accept the challenge. The royal courtyard was set under the open sky, surrounded by tall, gleaming spires. The stars above were bright, casting a cold, silvery glow on the ground. John stepped into the courtyard, his heart pounding in his chest. A crowd had gathered around the edges. All eyes focused on the two men who stood facing each other. Zalok was tall and broad, his frame muscular and imposing. He wore armor that seemed to shimmer in the light, and his eyes burned with the intensity of someone who believed he was destined for greatness. John, on the other hand, stood in simple, loose clothing, didn't have any armor, and he felt ridiculously out of place. The princess stood off to the side. watching intently, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and determination. She was not the one who had called for this duel, but she could not stop it now. It was the law of her people, and she knew it would take more than words to change the minds of the nobles who still viewed. "John is an outsider. I challenge you." "Human," Zalok said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Prove that you are worthy of the princess. If you can defeat me, you may remain her husband. If you fail, you will be cast aside, and I will take my rightful place." John swallowed hard. He had no experience with this kind of fighting, and everything about Zalok screamed danger. He had to try. He wasn't going to back down. Not now, not when everything was on the line. "Let's get this over with," Don said, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling in his chest. The duel began with a sharp clang of metal as Zalok swung his sword toward John. The weapon was heavy, but Zalok's movements were swift and precise. John barely had time to react before he had to step back to avoid the strike. His heart raced as the weight of the situation hit him fully. This was not just a fight for his survival. It was a fight for his place in Leora's life. John stumbled. As he moved, his feet not quite matching the speed of the duel, Zalok pressed forward relentlessly, his sword a blur of flashing steel. John tried to defend himself, grabbing a wooden practice staff that had been left near the edge of the courtyard. It wasn't much, but it was something. Zalok laughed, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "Is this what you call a weapon, human?" He swung his sword again, this time forcing John to block with all his strength. The impact sent a shock through John's arms, but he held on, gritting his teeth. For a moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. John's heart was pounding, and he could feel sweat beating on his forehead. His arms were trembling from the force of each blow, but he knew he had to keep fighting. He couldn't lose. Not now. Leora's face flashed in his mind. He remembered how she had stood by him, how she had chosen him despite everything. He couldn't fail her, not after everything they had been through. Zalok took another swing, but this time, John was ready. He ducked under the blow and stepped forward, swinging the staff at Zalok's legs. The move caught Zalok off guard, and he staggered, losing his balance for just a moment. It was enough. John swung the staff again, this time catching Zalok's side with a hard strike. The sound of the hit echoed through the courtyard, and for the first time Zalok faltered. John didn't hesitate. He pushed forward, using all his strength to knock Zalok's sword from his hand. The crowd gasped, stunned by the sudden shift in the duel. John stood over Zalok, panting heavily, the wooden staff held high. Zalok, now on the ground, glared up at him, his face twisted in disbelief. "You, ... you, ... Zalok muttered, his voice barely a whisper. John stood tall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He couldn't believe it. He had won. Leora stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. "This duel is over. John is my husband, and he has proven himself worthy." The crowd remained silent for a moment before slowly breaking into applause. John couldn't understand how they could be applauding, but he was too tired to think about it. He had done it. He had won. And for the first time since he had crash-landed on this planet, he felt like he belonged. Zalok slowly stood, his eyes still burning with anger, but there was nothing he could do. The duel was finished. The law had been upheld, and the princess had chosen her husband. John turned to Leora, who was watching him with a mixture of pride and relief. She walked toward him, her smile soft but genuine. "You did it," she said quietly. "I didn't know I had it in me," John replied, a laugh escaping his lips. He was still shaking from the fight, but the adrenaline was starting to wear off, and a sense of calm was settling over him. Leora smiled and took his hand. "More strength than you realize, John. And now we face the future together." As the crowd slowly began to disperse, John realized that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, but for now, he had one. And with Leora by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. The days following the duel were filled with change. John had proven himself in the eyes of the nobles, and his place as Leora's husband seemed secure. The tension that had filled the palace for so long had shifted, but there was still work to be done. A lot of work. John had been living in the royal palace for weeks now, but it still felt strange. He was no longer just a man who had crashed his spaceship onto an alien world. Now he was a prince, married to a powerful alien princess, and expected to play a role in the future of a kingdom he didn't fully understand. The palace was full of meetings, discussions, and plans for the future of the kingdom, plans for the future of their people. Leora had been busy too. Since the duel, she had taken control of the royal court with a strength John had never expected. She was not just a princess. She was a leader, a force of nature. And she had a vision for her people that was unlike anything the kingdom had ever seen. John had been watching her, learning from her, and trying to keep up with everything that was happening. But he was still an outsider, and he knew it. The nobles respected him now, but only because of his victory in the duel. They didn't truly see him as one of them. He was still the human husband of their princess, and that made him different. One evening, after a long day of meetings, John found himself standing on the balcony of the palace overlooking the kingdom. The city below was alive, full of movement and noise. He could see the lights of distant ships hovering in the sky and the grand structures that stretched up toward. The stars. Liora stepped up beside him, her presence calming. The two of them stood there in silence for a moment, taking in the view. It was peaceful, despite everything that had happened. "You've been quiet," Leora said softly, her voice a gentle contrast to the noise of the city below. "Something on your mind?" John took a deep breath. "I'm just thinking about everything," he said. "Everything has changed so quickly. I'm still trying to figure out where I fit in all of this. I've never been part of something so... big." Leora smiled, though her eyes were serious. "You fit in more than you think. You've already proven yourself in ways that no one else could. You've become a symbol of change for my people, John. You're not just my husband, you're a part of our future now." John glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "But I'm not like you. I don't come from here. I don't know your ways. Your customs? I'm just trying to learn." "You've already learned more than you think," Leora replied. "You've taught me things too, about freedom, about choice. The people respect you because of who you are, not because of where you come from." His thoughts swirling. Leora was right. He had learned a lot in a short amount of time, but there was still so much more to understand. He was part of this world now, but it was hard to know exactly how he could help shape it. The future of the kingdom weighed on both of them. Leora's vision for the future wasn't just about political power. It was about equality, change, and the freedom to choose one's own destiny. Wanted to break the chains of old traditions that had long held the kingdom back. And John, in a way, had become a symbol of that change, a human who had fallen into the heart of an ancient, powerful civilization and had come out stronger. The sound of footsteps behind them made John turn. It was the royal advisor, a sharp-eyed woman named Tayla. She was the one who had been closest to Leora throughout the whole process, offering advice and support. "Your Highness, Prince John," Tayla said, bowing slightly. "The council is waiting. For you, it's time for the next step." John glanced at Leora, who nodded in acknowledgement. They both turned and followed Tayla through the palace halls, toward the grand chamber where the council of nobles had gathered. The room was large and filled with murmurs of conversation. The nobles stood in small groups, talking quietly among themselves, but as soon as Leora entered, the room fell silent. They all turned to her with a mix of respect and wariness. Leora stood tall at the head of the room, John at her side. He could feel the weight of the eyes on him again, but this time it didn't bother him as much. He had earned his place here. He was part of this. "We are gathered here today," Leora began, her voice clear and commanding, "to discuss the future of our kingdom. It is time to take a new path, one that will lead us toward equality, prosperity, and peace. But we cannot do this alone. We need every voice here to contribute, every mind to think forward. The old ways must change." The council members exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, while others seemed uncertain. John could see the hesitation in their eyes. Changing the kingdom's ways wasn't going to be easy. And there were those who preferred the stability of tradition over the uncertainty of change. One of the older nobles, a tall figure named Lord Vale, stepped forward. He was the one who had opposed John the most when he first arrived. His face was lined with age, and his eyes held years of experience and stubbornness. "You speak of change, Your Highness," Lord Vale said, his voice deep and strong. "But change is dangerous. Our kingdom has thrived under the old laws. Are we really prepared to abandon them for a new vision that has not been proven?" John watched Leora as she responded. Her gaze was unwavering, and there was a quiet confidence in her voice. "We must embrace change, or we will be left behind," she said. "The world is evolving, and so must we. We will find a way to balance our traditions with the future. But it is time to start that journey." The room was still, and for a moment, no one spoke. But then, slowly, the other nobles began to murmur, their voices rising with agreement. One by one, they stepped forward to support Leora's vision. John realized something in that moment. Leora wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her people, for the future of her kingdom. He was a part of that fight now. Standing by her side as her equal, as the council meeting continued, John couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was just the beginning. There would be obstacles ahead, but together they would face them. The kingdom would change, and they would change it together. Later that night, as John and Leora stood together on the palace balcony once more, watching the lights of the kingdom below, John finally felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The future was uncertain, but with Leora by his side, he was ready to face it.